In 1961, a group of scientists set out to answer one of life's most profound questions. Is our destiny shaped by nature or nurture? To uncover the truth, they conducted a secret experiment, one so controversial it would remain hidden for over 5 decades. This experiment involved a set of identical triplet brothers. From birth, they were separated and placed into 3 vastly different families, one blue-collar, one middle-class, and one affluent. Their adoptive parents had no idea this separation was part of a grand psychological study. Fast forward 20 years, and fate intervened. 2 of the brothers stumbled upon each other by chance, setting off a chain of events that revealed their shared origins and the shocking experiment that had shaped their lives. The triplets at the heart of this extraordinary experiment were named David, Eddie, and Bobby. Born on July 12, 1961, at 11 a.m., they were identical triplets, genetically identical copies of one another, created from the same fertilized egg. Their resemblance was so uncanny that even their biological parents would have struggled to tell them apart. This made them the perfect subjects for the scientists' ambitious and highly secretive study. At just 6 months old, the brothers were separated and placed with 3 families from vastly different socioeconomic backgrounds. None of the adoptive parents, or the boys themselves, were told they had siblings. For the next 19 years, the triplets lived completely unaware of one another's existence. Then, in 1980, fate stepped in. Bobby, one of the triplets, had just turned 19 and was preparing to start his first year at Sullivan County Community College, a small, relatively unknown school in upstate New York. When he arrived on campus, something bizarre happened. Strangers kept stopping him, saying hello like they knew him. Confused, Bobby couldn't understand why everyone seemed so friendly or so familiar. Things took a stranger turn when a girl suddenly walked up to him, kissed him on the cheek, and called him Eddie. Bobby was utterly bewildered. Who was Eddie? Why did everyone think he was someone else? Later that day, as Bobby wandered into his dorm, one of the residents froze in shock. It was Eddie's best friend, who couldn't believe his eyes. "You're not Eddie," he said, his voice trembling. "But you look exactly like him." He explained that Eddie, who was a sophomore at the same college, was Bobby's identical twin, or so it seemed. Determined to solve the mystery, the friend offered to drive Bobby hundreds of miles to Long Island, where Eddie lived. Late that night, they arrived at Eddie's home and knocked on the door. When Eddie opened it, the 2 young men stood staring at each other, completely speechless. It was like looking into a mirror. Their resemblance was so striking that even Eddie's adoptive parents couldn't believe their eyes. The story of their miraculous reunion spread quickly, eventually reaching the newsroom of the New York Times. A columnist immediately recognized the potential of this extraordinary tale and, without hesitation, rented a private plane to fly from Los Angeles to New York overnight. This was a story too big to miss. Within days, the New York Times published the article, and the nation was captivated. The public marveled at the brothers' uncanny resemblance and the incredible serendipity of their reunion after 2 decades. It was a heartwarming and almost unbelievable story, but the real mystery had only just begun. Someone saw the article. As he stared at the photographs of the identical brothers, he was stunned. They looked exactly like him. That someone was David, the 3rd member of the triplets. David wasted no time. He reached out to Eddie and Bobby, and when they met, the truth was undeniable. They weren't just twins, they were identical triplets, separated at birth, brought up in entirely different families, and somehow reunited 2 decades later by sheer chance. The story took the nation by storm. The New York Times covered the astonishing reunion again, and soon, the 3 brothers graced the front pages of every major newspaper across America. From morning talk shows to late-night specials, the triplets became a national sensation. What fascinated everyone wasn't just their uncanny resemblance, but the eerie similarities in their personalities, habits, and even preferences. Despite growing up apart, they shared an extraordinary number of traits.
These 3 young men, they're all seated in the same position.
Our lives are parallel to a phenomenal degree. It's ridiculous.
We always
Our
talk at the
gestures
same
and
time.
I'll start a sentence and he'll finish it.
We all like Chinese food.
You were all wrestlers at one time?
Yes.
You all smoke the same brand of cigarettes?
Yes.
Do you like the same colors?
Yes.
Yeah, I was curious. How's their taste in women? Is it similar?
Yes. Definitely.
Reunited and inseparable, the brothers decided to explore their shared roots. They returned to New York City, where they had been born, and threw themselves into the vibrant nightlife they'd missed out on for 20 years. Bar hopping, partying, and soaking in the city's energy, they quickly became local celebrities. Wherever they went, people recognized them. Girls would approach them on the street just to talk to these now famous triplets. Capitalizing on their newfound fame, the brothers decided to start a business together. They opened a restaurant in New York called Triplets. It was an instant hit, drawing customers from across the country who wanted to meet them in person. Within just 6 months, the restaurant had earned over $1 million, a staggering sum in 1983. Life seemed perfect. The brothers were now wealthy, famous, and enjoying their time together. They each got married, started families, and looked forward to a bright future. Everything seemed too good to be true. But was it? A journalist named Lawrence Wright stumbled upon their story, and his reaction was different from the public's fascination. He wasn't just amazed, he was deeply suspicious. Lawrence had previously written an article about the lives of twin sisters who had been separated at birth. In the process, he'd done extensive research on the history of twins in psychological studies. What he discovered back then was unsettling. As far back as the 1930s, several American universities had partnered with welfare agencies to conduct secret experiments. They funded these agencies to deliberately place identical twins into vastly different homes, some affluent, others working class, to see if nature or nurture had the greater influence on a person's life. Lawrence began to wonder, could the triplets be part of such an experiment? Digging deeper, he found that all three had been adopted through the Louise Wise Adoption Agency, a well-known organization in New York. The more he investigated, the more connections he uncovered. Shockingly, many cases of long-lost twins reunited later in life also traced back to this agency. Lawrence was now convinced that the triplets, like those twins, were unwitting subjects of a highly unethical scientific study. He published his findings, and the story exploded. The triplets, previously basking in fame and adoration, were now consumed by questions about their past. For the first time, they began to truly examine their lives. The three sets of adoptive parents decided to confront the Louise Wise Agency directly to uncover the truth. In a closed-door meeting with the agency's leadership, they demanded answers. The agency admitted they had intentionally separated the brothers. Their excuse? If adoptive parents were informed that the children were part of a set of multiples, most would refuse to take them in, fearing the financial burden. But when pressed about whether the separations were part of a psychological experiment, the agency staunchly denied any such involvement. However, the brothers began recalling strange memories from their childhoods, visits from people who claimed to be from the agency. These visitors, often a man and a woman, would test them, asking endless questions and making notes. This routine began when the boys were just 1 year old and continued into their teenage years. The visits were always explained as routine check-ins from the agency, but now it seemed clear. These check-ins were part of a controlled study. Encouraged by Lawrence, the brothers decided to search for their biological parents. The agency initially claimed they had no records, but the brothers turned to New York's archives. There, they found their birth records and their mother's name. When they finally located her, the truth was heartbreaking. Their mother had been a young woman who became pregnant after a masked ball. Unprepared for motherhood, she'd given the boys up for adoption, having no idea they were triplets. She didn't even know the identity of their father. Now remarried with a new family, she declined to have any contact with them. The rejection hit the brothers hard. They felt abandoned all over again. Meanwhile, Lawrence uncovered more about the man behind the experiment. Dr. Peter Neubauer, a renowned psychiatrist who had fled Nazi-occupied Austria during World War II. Once in the United States, He built a distinguished career in psychiatry and developed close ties with the Louise Wise Agency. The pieces fell into place. Neubauer had orchestrated the separations, using the agency to find perfect subjects, identical siblings born to struggling single mothers who couldn't keep their babies. The study had been meticulously planned, following the children for decades without their knowledge. It wasn't just the triplets. Lawrence's report revealed a chilling reality. 8 more sets of identical twins, also adopted through the Louise Wise Agency, had discovered each other after years apart. Each pair had been placed in homes with contrasting socio-economic conditions, and all had been unknowingly monitored by Neubauer's team. Even the triplets' miraculous reunion wasn't left to chance. Neubauer's team had ensured that Bobby and Eddie received acceptance letters to the same college, knowing this would bring them together. Their entire lives, from infancy to adulthood, had been part of an experiment. The truth was devastating. The brothers, who had once been ecstatic to find each other, now felt like lab rats in a twisted social experiment. Their childhood memories, their struggles, even their joys, everything seemed tainted by manipulation. The story sparked outrage, likened to a real-life Truman Show. Years later, the brothers' unity began to unravel. Eddie decided to leave the restaurant business they had built together. Running the restaurant had led to constant conflicts between them, and Eddie had grown increasingly troubled by the revelations surrounding their past. For over a decade, he distanced himself from his brothers, cutting off all contact. It wasn't until Bobby and David reached out to Eddie's wife that they learned the truth. Eddie had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, a condition marked by alternating episodes of mania and depression. They tried to repair their relationship with him, but before they could make meaningful progress, devastating news arrived. Eddie had taken his own life with a gun. The tragedy forced Bobby and David to confront a painful realization. Despite their shared DNA and uncanny similarities, they were, in essence, strangers. The bond they thought they had was far more fragile than they'd imagined. For Eddie, their reunion had been less of a blessing and more of a burden, exacerbating his mental health struggles. Lawrence Wright, the journalist who had unearthed their story, wasn't convinced this was a coincidence. As he dug deeper, he discovered an alarming pattern among the other twins and triplets involved in the secret experiment. Of the 8 pairs of identical twins he had identified, 2 others had also died by suicide. Further investigation revealed another chilling detail. The triplets' biological mother had suffered from a severe mental illness. So had the mothers of the twins who had taken their own lives. Lawrence began to suspect that the study wasn't just about nature versus nurture. What if the experiment had also been designed to explore the heritability of mental illness? Were the researchers deliberately selecting children born to mentally ill mothers to study whether genetics or environment played a greater role in their outcomes? Driven by these questions, Lawrence sought out Dr. Peter Neubauer, the mastermind behind the study. For years, Neubauer refused interviews, but after learning of Eddie's death, he agreed to a brief phone call.
How did this study come about?
I tell you, I would rather not want to speak about it until we have published it.
Oh, when do you plan to publish it?
In about a year or a year and a half from now.
Well, tell me a little bit about the scope of the study and how many people were involved in it.
The study was only based on a small number of identical twins separated at birth. For many, many reasons, which I don't want to talk about that now. We had to stop it because it became too expensive.
Who was your primary support?
Also private family foundations. We got some money from Washington.
Okay, thanks again for your time.
Bye.
Neubauer's answers were evasive, offering no real insight into the experiment's purpose. Worse, the study's findings were never published. Frustrated but undeterred, Lawrence turned his attention to Neubauer's former research team. Most refused to talk, hinting at powerful forces backing the study and a deliberate effort to keep its details buried. Eventually, one source revealed that all the experiment's data had been archived at Yale University. Lawrence traveled there and managed to locate the study's catalog. What he found shocked him. Folders upon folders containing detailed records of identical siblings, far more subjects than he had imagined. But when he tried to access the files, he hit a wall. The records had been sealed until 2066, a deliberate move to keep the experiment shrouded in secrecy. This timeline was unusual. In the US, classified documents are typically sealed for 50 years, suggesting the files were likely deposited at Yale in 2016. Requests to access the files had been made before, but every single one had been denied. The more Lawrence dug, the clearer it became that Neubauer's team had been backed by a powerful, politically connected organization intent on keeping the study under wraps. Realizing that the full truth might not emerge in his lifetime, Lawrence turned to a filmmaker to share his findings. In 2018, the documentary 3 Identical Strangers premiered, exposing the experiment to the world. But the ultimate questions remained unanswered. Why had the experiment been conducted? What were its conclusions? Neubauer had passed away, and many of his colleagues were also no longer alive. With the record sealed, the truth was locked away for decades. The researchers had sought to decode the human experience, to find patterns that could explain the chaos of life. But perhaps their very pursuit was flawed. Life is unpredictable, shaped by a mix of factors too complex to reduce to a formula. If our existence could be boiled down to a simple equation, would it even hold meaning anymore? The experiment's ultimate lesson might be the one its creators missed entirely. The beauty of life lies in its uncertainty, its struggles, and its unanswered questions. Perhaps the true purpose of living isn't to find the meaning of life, but to live it, to embrace the search, the hope, and the challenges that come with it.